Welcome to Lost in Revision. All of our content is public domain, literature, fairy tales, and folklore. Our goal is to at least break even to cover our expenses, so any support that you can offer to help us reach that goal helps keep this podcast going and you entertained. All of our music is by Nathan Hubble and is used with his permission. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Lost in Revision, brought to you by Allergy Meds and HEPA filters.
And gingins.
Oh. Aw. I wish I could have gingins, but I'm allergic to ginger. It's so sad. Well, I am here, as always, with two of my favorite humans, Angel and Polly. How are you today, Angel?
Oh, summer vacation has finally started. I'm in the middle of packing for a cruise I'm going on with one of my dearest friends to celebrate her 50th birthday. Happy birthday, Brandy.
Ooh, that sounds fun. Happy birthday, Brandy. And how about you, Polly?
Happy birthday, Brandy. I hope you two have a fabulous time. I want to go on a cruise someday, but Peanut Gallery and I can't agree on where. He wants to go to the Caribbean, and I want a Norwegian cruise because sand and heat and sun, yuck. On another note, I recruited a new listener at work. So, hi, Eli. I hope you're still enjoying it. He was cackling over the frog prints on the grill the other night.
Awesome.
That is awesome. It's good to know that people think we're funny other than us. So, hi, Eli. Welcome to the Lost in Revision family. So, Angel, tell us a little bit about the history and culture of this story.
Well, we are returning once again to the Brothers Grimm for today's story, but this time it is possibly as dark and disturbing as you could want from a Grimm story. Grimm's Household Tales was published in 1812. It included 200 stories and 10 legends. It not only has what most would consider their classic stories, but dozens of tales that aren't as well known. This story was titled Das Mädchen ohne Hände and is sometimes called the Handless Maiden. Right off the bat, you can tell this one is going to have some dismemberment for you, Natalie.
Excellent.
Yeah, dismemberment and some really unfair treatment of an innocent. The story kind of reeks of the females are garbage sentiment.
I don't know. People seem to want to take care of her. Well, once the evil one isn't trying to steal her, at least. I mean, she just couldn't stomach looking at the person who chopped off her hands every day. Looking at the person every day, not chopping off her hands every day.
Yeah, and this not only does a poor sweet young girl get her hands chopped off by her father, she's also stalked by an evil spirit, and she turns to God to protect her. Eventually, there is a good king who tries to save her.
I guess it's just the Miller that's the misogynist. He's the real evil in this story.
He is so very weak and greedy. He just gives me shivers. None of the stories I'm doing this year are from my childhood. And with this one, I can see why. There is no way my mother would have let a book with this story into our house. I am enjoying purposefully seeking out stories I've never heard of and experiencing them for the first time with our Lost in Revision family.
It is really fun to find new and disturbing things to love. So let's move on to the reading of the story, and then we can discuss it after.
The Girl Without Hands by the Brothers Grimm. A certain miller had little by little fallen into poverty, and had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree behind it. Once, when he had gone into the forest to fetch wood, an old man stepped up to him whom he had never seen before, and said, "Why dost thou plague thyself with cutting wood? I will make thee rich if thou wilt promise me what is standing behind thy mill." "What can that be but my apple tree?" thought the miller, and said, "Yes," and gave a written promise to the stranger. He, however, laughed mockingly and said, "When 3 years have passed, I will come and carry away what belongs to me." And then he went. When the miller got home, his wife came to meet him and said, "Tell me, miller, from whence comes this sudden wealth into our house? All at once every box and chest was filled. No one brought it in, and I know not how it happened." He answered, "It comes from a stranger who met me in the forest and promised me great treasure. I, in return, have promised him what stands behind the mill. We can very well give him the big apple tree for it." "Oh, husband," said the terrified wife, "that must have been the devil. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who was standing behind the mill sweeping the yard." The miller's daughter was a beautiful, pious girl, and lived through the 3 years in fear of God and without sin. When therefore the time was over, and the day came when the evil one was to fetch her, she washed herself clean, and made a circle around herself with chalk. The devil appeared quite early, but he could not come near her. Angrily he said to the miller, "Take all water away from her, that she may no longer be able to wash herself, for otherwise I have no power over her." The miller was afraid, and did so. The next morning the devil came again, but she had wept on her hands, and they were quite clean. Again he could not get near her, and furiously said to the miller, "Cut her hands off, or else I cannot get the better of her." The miller was shocked, and answered, "How could I cut off my own child's hands?" Then the evil one threatened him, and said, "If thou dost not do it, thine art mine, and I will take thee thyself." The father became alarmed, and promised to obey him. So he went to the girl and said, "My child, if I do not cut off both thine hands, the devil will carry me away, and in my terror I have promised to do it. Help me in my need, and forgive me the harm I do thee." She replied, "Dear father, do with me what you will. I am your child." Thereupon she laid down both her hands and let them be cut off. The devil came for the 3rd time, but she had wept so long and so much on the stumps that after all they were quite clean. Then he had to give in, and had lost all right over her. The miller said to her, "I have by means of thee received such great wealth that I will keep thee most delicately as long as thou livest." But she replied, "Here I cannot stay. I will go forth. Compassionate people will give me as much as I require." Thereupon she caused her maimed arms to be bound to her back, and by sunrise she set out on her way, and walked the whole day until night fell. Then she came to a royal garden, and by the shimmering of the moon she saw that trees covered with beautiful fruits grew in it, but she could not enter, for there was much water around it. And as she had walked the whole day and not eaten one mouthful, and hunger tormented her, she thought, "Ah, if I were but inside, that I might eat of the fruit, else must I die of hunger." Then she knelt down and called on God the Lord and prayed. And suddenly an angel came towards her, who made a dam in the water, so that the moat became dry, and she could walk through it. And now she went into the garden, and the angel went with her. She saw a tree covered with beautiful pears, but they were all counted. Then she went to them, and to still her hunger, ate one with her mouth from the tree, but no more. The gardener was watching, but as the angel was standing by, he was afraid, and thought the maiden was a spirit, and was silent. Neither did he dare to cry out or to speak to the spirit. When she had eaten the pear, she was satisfied, and went and concealed herself among the bushes. The king to whom the garden belonged came down the next morning, and counted, and saw that one of the pears was missing, and asked the gardener what became of it, as it was not lying beneath the tree, but was gone. Then answered the gardener, "Last night a spirit came in who had no hands, and ate off one of the pears with its mouth." The king said, "How did a spirit get over the water, and where did it go after it had eaten the pear?" The gardener answered, "Someone came in a snow-white garment from heaven, who made a dam, and kept back the water, that the spirit might walk through the moat. And as it must have been an angel, I was afraid, and asked no questions, and did not cry out. When the spirit had eaten the pear, it went back again." The king said, "If it be as thou sayest, I will watch with thee tonight." When it grew dark, the king came into the garden, and brought a priest with him, who was to speak to the spirit. All three seated themselves beneath the tree and watched. At midnight the maiden came creeping out of the thicket, went to the tree, and again ate one pear off it with her mouth, and beside her stood the angel in white garments. Then the priest went out to them and said, "Comest thou from heaven or from earth? Art thou a spirit or a human being?" She replied, "I am no spirit, but an unhappy mortal, deserted by all but God." The king said, "If thou art forsaken by all the world, yet will I not forsake thee." He took her with him into his royal palace, and as she was so beautiful and good, he loved her with all his heart, had silver hands made for her, and took her to wife. After a year, the king had to take the field, so he commended his young queen to the care of his mother, and said, "If she is brought to bed, take care of her, nurse her well, and tell me of it at once in a letter." Then she gave birth to a fine boy. So the old mother made haste to write and announce the joyful news to him. But the messenger rested by a brook on the way, and as fatigued by the great distance, he fell asleep. Then the devil, who was always seeking to injure the good queen, exchanged the letter for another, in which was written that the queen had brought a monster into the world. When the king read the letter, he was shocked and much troubled, but he wrote in answer that they were to take great care of the queen and nurse her well until his arrival. The messenger went back with the letter, but rested at the same place and again fell asleep. Then came the devil once more, and put a different letter in his pocket, in which it was written that they were to put the queen and her child to death. The old mother was terribly shocked when she received the letter, and could not believe it. She wrote back again to the king, but received no other answer, because each time the devil substituted a false letter, and in the last letter it was also written that she was to preserve the queen's tongue and eyes as a token that she had obeyed. But the old mother wept to think such innocent blood was to be shed, and had a hind brought by night, and cut out her tongue and eyes, and kept them. Then she said to the queen, "I cannot have thee killed as the king commands, but here thou mayst stay no longer. Go forth into the wide world with thy child, and never come here again." The poor woman tied her child on her back, and went away with eyes full of tears. She came into a great wild forest, and then she fell on her knees and prayed to God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to her, and led her into a little white house, on which a sign with the words, "Here all dwell free." A snow-white maiden came out of the little house and said, "Welcome home, Lady Queen." and conducted her inside. Then they unbound the little boy from her back and held him to her breast that he might feed, and laid him in a beautifully made little bed. Then said the poor woman, "From whence knowest thou that I was a queen?" The white maiden answered, "I am an angel sent by God to watch over thee and thy child." The queen stayed 7 years in the little house, and was well cared for. And by God's grace, because of her piety, her hands, which had been cut off, grew once more. At last the king came home again from war, and his first wish was to see his wife and the child. Then his aged mother began to weep, and said, "Thou wicked man, why didst thou write to me that I was to take those 2 innocent lives?" And she showed him the 2 letters which the evil one had forged, and then continued, "I did as thou badest me." And she showed the tokens, the tongue, and the eyes. Then the king began to weep for his poor wife and his little son so much more bitterly than she was doing, that the aged mother had compassion on him, and said, "Be at peace. She still lives. I secretly caused a hind to be killed, and took these tokens from it. But I bound the child to thy wife's back, and bade her go forth into the wide world, and made her promise never to come back here again, because thou wert so angry with her." Then spoke the king, "I will go as far as the sky is blue, and neither eat nor drink until I have found again my dear wife and my child, if in the meantime they have not been killed or died of hunger." Thereupon the king travelled about for 7 long years, and sought her in every cleft of the rocks, and in every cave. But he found her not, and thought she had died of want. During the whole of this time he neither ate nor drank, but God supported him. At length he came into a great forest, and found therein the little house whose sign was, "Here all dwell free." Then forth came the white maiden, took him by the hand, and led him in, and said, "Welcome, Lord King," and asked him from whence he came. He answered, "Soon I shall have travelled about for the space of 7 years, and I seek my wife and her child, but cannot find them." The angel offered him meat and drink, but he did not take anything, and only wished to rest a little. Then he lay down to sleep, and put a handkerchief over his face. Thereupon the angel went into the chamber where the queen sat with her son, whom she usually called Sorrowful, and said to her, "Go out with thy child, thy husband has come." So she went to the place where he lay, and the handkerchief fell from his face. Then said she, "Sorrowful, pick up thy father's handkerchief, and cover his face again." The child picked it up, and put it over his face again. The king, in his sleep, heard what had passed, and had pleasure in letting the handkerchief fall once more. But the child grew impatient, and said, "Dear mother, how can I cover my father's face when I have no father in this world? I have learnt to say the prayer, 'Our Father which art in heaven.' Thou hast told me that my father was in heaven, and was the good God. And how can I know a wild man like this? He is not my father." When the king heard that, he got up and asked who they were. Then said she, "I am thy wife, and that is thy son Sorrowful." And he saw her living hands, and said, "My wife had silver hands." She answered, "The good God has caused my natural hands to grow again." And the angel went into the inner room and brought the silver hands and showed them to him. Hereupon he knew for a certainty that it was his dear wife and his dear child, and he kissed them and was glad, and said, "A heavy stone has fallen from off mine heart." Then the angel of God gave them one meal with her, and after that they went home to the king's aged mother. There were great rejoicings everywhere, and the king and queen were married again and lived contentedly to their happy end. The end.
And we're back. So, what is your favorite part or version?
My first impression was of Rumpelstiltskin, which also has a miller's daughter traded by her father for wealth. The difference being in this one, she's traded directly to the evil one, whether that's Satan himself or a demon or a fairy. You know, in the post-Reformation Germany in which the tale was recorded, the difference would not have mattered. All evil was the evil one, and fairies were lumped into that.
Oh, bless their hearts.
I don't know, this evil one did not have very fairy vibes for me. There were elements of her dealing with the evil one that I found fascinating that I hadn't seen in some stories before. The ring of salt is pretty common, but the evil one not being able to approach her if she had bathed was a new one for me.
I thought she used chalk.
Sorry, multiple versions in my brain. In one version, it was salt, but in this version, it was chalk. It could be one of the printers felt chalk was too witchy for a pious, God-fearing girl.
True. Revisionist history. I did only read one version, though, because I'm a slacker.
Yeah, traditionally either salt or chalk is used, but it harkens back to anything supernatural being compelled to count the grains. So anything with a fine grain should work because, you know, fae things have OCD. Supernatural touched on that with the leprechaun episode. You know, they threw salt at him and he had to stop and count it. And he's like, you know, looking up at him all pissed off while he's 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Ritual cleansing is an age-old tradition for pious persons throughout history and across most all religions. Although more often it is so that we can approach holiness, not so that unholiness can't approach us.
Well, chalk would have worked just fine if the dad couldn't approach her.
Yeah, I also like that she gave her hands as sacrifice out of obedience when he wouldn't make sacrifice for her safety. You know, sort of like taking hold of her own destiny.
My favorite part is you liking the dismemberment.
One of my favorite parts was the sign over the door in her cottage of safe haven that she found when the mom sent her away to keep her safe. In this version, it said, "Here all dwell free." But in another version I read, it said, "Here may everyone live freely." And both have similar meanings, but I like the wording of the second one better. It just gave me this image of having a place to live where you could just live your life and nobody was going to mess with you. You know, I kind of want that sign to post over the door of my house, except I'm afraid that it would cause my family to stop helping to pay the bills. But the idea of everyone living in safety and however they choose really resonated with me, which makes sense. I do tend to adopt strays, both animals and people.
Maybe make it say, "Here everyone lives safely."
Hi, I'm a stray. And maybe here everyone may live authentically.
Perfect.
I love it.
Yes.
I want one too now.
Well, I'm good for some stuff. So what is your least favorite part or version?
I gotta say, I'm not a fan of the father. He was just like, "Sorry, daughter, gotta chop off your hands or I might die myself. Sucks to be you."
Yeah, the father was pretty awful, but so stereotypical of abusive male. "I'm going to do this horrible thing to you because it's what's best for me. Ha! And then I will say I'm sorry and promise to treat you better in the future." But I did love that she was very, no, thank you. I would rather wander the world alone and trust in strangers than give you the opportunity to hurt me anymore.
Right, go her.
Yeah, she was like, ew, no, I'm not living here with someone who would abuse me in such a way.
She's kind of a paragon of female strength, and that she is consistently heading out into the world, regardless of her challenges, to find a safer place for her and her child to live. She never just stays put and continues to be abused.
Aw, you think I'm a paragon? Oh, I love you too.
I always have and I always will.
My least favorite part was her growing her hands back. I mean, if miracles like that ever actually happened, there would be no atheists.
It's kind of ableist too, to be honest. I mean, some stuff just doesn't grow back.
And she never even complained about it.
Yeah. Stuff just doesn't grow back. Although Peanut Gallery has a friend who grew back a whole kidney, but spontaneously, not through the power of prayer.
Well, that's just science.
It struck me as odd at first when she got the hands back, but then in my mind, that was just part of finding a place to live for 7 years, magic number 7, where she was accepted as she was and didn't have to conform to others influencing her life. I almost saw the hands coming back more as a symbol of her actually being her, as you said, true, authentic self.
I'm picturing Deadpool now with little tiny baby hands.
Well, yeah, just speaking of the 7 years to live for the magic number 7, the kid had to have been around 14 when the king found him, because she was in the house for 7 years and then he traveled without food or water. How for 7 years? So somewhere between 7 and 14 and living without food or water?
Those 7 years could have overlapped. I think the kid was more like somewhere between 7 and 9.
Yeah, something like that. I agree. But also, how did the king travel without food or water for 7 years?
Because God sustained him. It says that.
Oh, but biblically speaking, the way that God sustains people is by giving them manna and then yeeting birds at their heads when they complain about not having meat. I mean, and he killed people with those birds too, by the way.
Ooh, I'm an Israelite. I don't like manna.
Oh yeah? We'll have some meat then.
like Emerald. Bam!
Well, Grimm doesn't give details on how God sustained him, so no telling what he was sent. For all we know, it was protein smoothies. Goodness knows those things are neither food nor drink.
He sustained him by his holiness. He just spontaneously generated food in his belly. I don't know. I don't see hands growing back in the Bible, but apparently God did that here too.
Yeah, the Bible doesn't chameleon back body parts either. It just revives dead people. So what are the original lessons this story was trying to convey, other than magically surviving starvation, dehydration, and growing back random limbs?
Well, obviously it's about the power of a pious life. Everything good that happened to this girl was because of her piety and faith. It kept saying so.
Yeah, agreed. But it wasn't about the typical pious. She wasn't attending a specific church or following the directives of a churchman. It was the belief and trust in simply being good and believing in God. She wasn't any specific religion, but very true to who she was. It wasn't pious for show.
No, it was profoundly personal, almost saint-like.
It actually seemed somewhat like Muslim to me, with the cleanliness being what really kept the evil at bay, at least inside of the circle. Her washing and then her tears cleaning her off kept her safe.
Becoming clean with the weeping of tears is present in the lore of a lot of Catholic saints, particularly female ones. I can't recall which, but there was one female saint whose weeping actually extinguished the fires that were meant to kill her with being burnt at the stake, thus securing her holiness. I forget how she died, because to be a saint you have to die, but it wasn't burnt at the stake. Maybe she was just swept away to heaven by the angels afterwards.
I mean, it was probably still burns, because those stories are all just fairy tales anyhow.
Right?
We used to have to encourage women in counseling sessions to allow themselves to cry because they were so used to hiding it from their families. One of the ways that actually worked was telling them that tears are sacred.
Yeah, not enough people know how to be able to cry. Crying is such a visceral cleansing. I always love that part in Anne McCaffrey's The Ship Who Searched, where Hypatia Cade learned how to cry as a brain ship because, you know, she'd have a body, so she couldn't cry.
You know, me tearing up at that memory just proves I have never had trouble allowing emotions to overflow in trickles of tears.
The Brain Ship series always makes me tear up. And that's exactly why I adore the stories that Donkey Kick Me in the Chest. I forget to cry about real stuff because I'm in problem solving mode, so the books help me.
I always cry over like animals and stuff.
Oh, well, yeah, if you didn't. I mean, there's even a whole song about that. She never cried when Old Yeller died. So, what do y'all think the modern lesson would be?
Maybe check behind the barn before you make blind contracts with dubious hucksters.
For real.
Seriously, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. I also think a modern lesson could be taken from the mother-in-law. I like the fact that for once the mother-in-law wasn't evil. She was also able to think for herself and refused to simply follow written words rather than think for herself. So I think a lesson from her would be, if you get mail that seems fishy, trust your instincts. Internet trolls and fishers equal modern-day evil ones.
Yeah, no, the best mother-in-law award definitely goes to this king's mother.
Right? All these stories that Angel's finding are supposed to be like the super dark ones, but they have such wholesome background characters.
It's all about balance.
Even when I try to be evil, I get
You could never be evil. Oh. So, in closing, what do you think happened after the story?
You know, I'm hoping the son had the opportunity to rename himself.
He was only like 14 at most. And a lot of cultures, you know, not evangelical Christians, but a lot of cultures embrace the idea of redefining oneself at the coming of age, which often includes a new or, you know, more formal name.
Yeah, especially royalty. They sometimes get to pick a name when they take the throne. Well, this story ends on a happily ever after, so how about we just hope it stayed that way?
Yeah, too bad God couldn't spontaneously regenerate poor Taily-Po's tail.
Yeah,
would have saved the dogs.
Right? Poor dogs.
This group, they have already suffered enough. So let's just leave them finally getting to be a family and the grandma still being alive to get to know her grandson.
Yeah, no happy for the miller and his wife. Forget them.
Well, they were still rich. Maybe not happy, just rich.
We should eat the rich.
A nice long pork broth is good in the winter.
Yeah, remember, long braising for bone in.
Well, that wraps us up. Enjoy your cruise, Angel. I love y'all.
We kill me.
Here's your meat.
I'm Israelite. I don't like manna.
Dear Lord.
Yeah, that's who did it.
You know, it's funny. I was driving down the road the other day, and I saw one of those cars that had just you know, like Jesus across the back window. And like every time I see one of those, it's like in my head, it's like Jesus.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today. Check us out on Patreon. You can help us meet our small goal of breaking even and covering our expenses. Your support helps pay for all of the things that podcasting requires and helps keep this show alive and growing. If you can't afford to support us financially, go give us a good review, subscribe or follow, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to fact check us and offer suggestions to make our show better for you. You can also send us an email at lostinrevisionpodcast@gmail.com.
There's a lot more waiting for us all at the end of the road.